Hey everyone, a quick announcement before we begin. We are very pleased to say that Volume G of the Gospel Feast series, The Prophet Elijah, is now available on Amazon. The tribes of Israel consider Elijah to be one of the greatest servants of God to have ever walked the earth. Many Jews believe that he is the greatest. Considering his very high esteem, it is incomprehensible that we know so very little about him. Stop and ask yourself, who were his parents? Where was he born? What tribe of Israel did he belong to? Where did he get his authority? Which priesthood did he hold? Why was he taken up by the Lord so that he wouldn't die? What did he do to earn this blessing? Where was he taken? Where is he now? Why was he promised to return to earth before the Lord's return? Why him? Why is he the only prophet begged to come back every year at Passover? Believe it or not, we know the answers to all of these questions. And so, it's time for another feast into the Word. It will be another feast that you will never forget. Now back to our show.
Welcome back to this very special 7th question and answer episode, as this actually happens to be our 7th question and answer. So in Eastern thinking, 7 times 7, it should be a very special one. So we have saved a very special question for this episode. Willis from Bozeman asks, what is your speculated timeline for the last events before the Lord's return? And we saved that question because we have touched on this several times in several of our podcasts of different events that come in order before the Lord's return or have to happen before he comes. But I think this gentleman really wants us to lay down what we understand or what we speculate.
Do you think he's looking for more of an order of events, more or less?
I think most people would probably appreciate that.
Well, we can certainly speculate.
And we do a lot of speculation here. So I say let's proceed with that thought of here's what we think will happen preceding the Lord's return.
Okay, that is quite a question. Let me just preface it by saying that this is an opinion, of course. It could be very wrong, but certainly based on the scriptures that we have, and we do have a lot, when you take the Old Testament and some of the New Testament and the restored scriptures and you put them together, you do get a rather exacting picture of what we expect. Putting it into exact order is a little more tricky. I think the Lord doesn't give us exact series of events in the totality of what he's planning, purposely because he has an enemy. And there are a tremendous amount of wicked people who would use that against him. And he's trying to both reach them, hoping that he can save some of them, like the prodigal son, and he's trying to save those that trust him and want to hold on. And if the enemy knows all of the other generals' plans, it becomes very difficult for that general to succeed.
Okay, so you're saying some of this is a little bit confusing on purpose for our benefit.
I absolutely think so.
Okay, so anyone that's been having this trouble understanding the scriptures, it's okay. You're not misunderstanding them. They're that way on purpose.
I think that's true. Now, if you are reading the Gospel Feast series, there are several books that deal with this.
Some of your books do quite clearly try to lay out what we know from the scriptures and mingle in a little bit of speculation to fill in some of the gaps.
That is true. Anyone that wants more, you can certainly find it in Daniel, and we've studied Daniel together already. The other books that we have in the series that deal with these things are Ezekiel, and there is Zechariah, which deals with some of this, and we're going to be dealing with Zechariah in our next season.
Exactly.
Well, and then you have to add the book of Revelation, which is volume 6 in the series, too.
Absolutely. Okay, so we will cover these things more in depth, so maybe a simple timeline is more appropriate at this point.
I think that'll be wonderful. Personally, I always expected the events of the end days to really start culminating around the year 2022, particularly in the fall. And I've been giving a lecture on Revelation, and there was a young missionary in the crowd who raised his hand, and he said to me, you know, you keep talking about the year 2022 in the fall as being the official end of the half hour of silence and the beginning of what we call the testimony of nature, which we can talk about a little more. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, John didn't say that the half hour of silence would be exactly a half hour. He said it was about a half hour. And I felt like someone had just sort of kicked me in the head because I went, huh? In the very mathematical laying it all out, I thought, wait a minute. So I went, flip through the book, and there it was, about a half hour. And I just thought, I was really proud of him, because one of the things that I keep pushing in all these series is it's one thing to be told what the book says. It's another thing to set down your preconceptions and read the book yourself with the Holy Ghost and see what are the words that are really there. And I had missed the word about. So it wasn't probably more than 3 months later, and I had got up in the morning, and there was on the news that there had been an earthquake on the 18th of March in the year 2020, and that it was a 5.7, if I remember, earthquake, had hit the Salt Lake Valley, and that it shook the trumpet out of Moroni's mouth.
Now, I have seen pictures of that. There at the top of the temple is Moroni holding nothing.
I'll tell you, it was like, again, someone kicked me in the head. All of a sudden, I thought to myself, I just had this flash in my brain and said, what more perfect symbol of a half hour of silence ending than the trumpet that is proclaiming to the world that the gospel has been restored, and the trumpet is gone. If you look at that statue, the end of the trumpet, the horn part, is big and heavy, and it goes down to the shaft and it rests in his mouth. Okay. So if you shake him, then you'd expect the part in the mouth to slide out, and then the trumpet slides down, and the horn gets hooked in his hand, and it's hanging there. No. The horn was gone.
It had worked its way out completely.
That's really tough. That statue is big.
Yeah, he's 14 plus feet tall.
I really don't even know how it happened. They did later find the trumpet. It was like down on the roof. But that is weird.
It's a beloved symbol to us, to members of the Latter-day Saint community, anywhere near a temple that has a Moroni on it. They love to see that symbol. We take it to heart because it's the announcement that the restoration of the gospel has begun.
It is. And that the missionary work going door to door is active. Joseph Smith said that the angel flying through the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach, was Moroni, trumpeting to the world, warning them that the end was nearby and calling the elect to gather. And so the whole point of the half hour of silence is that ends, and the Lord begins to testify himself with nature. And so to have Moroni's trumpet disappear really was, for me, a shock. And it came earlier than I expected. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that the half hour of silence has actually ended. I do think the half hour of silence is going to end in the fall of the year 2022. But it could be about.
Could be about. So that would then be one of our first markers in our timeline we're building, is the end of the half hour of silence, and then what comes next.
Well, I think most of our listeners and readers know that it's my speculation that the opening of the seventh seal happened. So in other words, the millennium began with the fall of the Twin Towers on September 11th in the year 2001.
And so that would then be a clock trigger.
I believe it was. Isaiah talks about the towers disappearing and the terror that it causes. John says that the seventh seal would open and it would appear as though the sixth seal continued, and that there would be, in a sense, this half hour of silence where it appeared that nothing had really happened. You've got this major event. The millennium has opened. You'd expect to see the heavens awake, the planets to move, to see the Lord unroll the heavens as a scroll and appear his face. This is a big deal. This is the millennial reign. And yet nothing happens for a half hour of heaven's time. That half hour of heaven's time we believe to be about 21 years. So that about 21 years puts us at the year 2022. Now, the reason it has to be in the fall, with the partaking of the forbidden fruit by Adam and Eve, the clock began. And since they had lived in a garden of continual spring, the change that they started to see was a fall-type experience, and it became a harvest experience. And they had to actually work by the sweat of their brow to prepare a harvest in preparation for the next springtime. So it became an autumn.
Okay. So with the Roman reordering of our calendar, we start the year based on solstices and other silliness.
Yes, that's right.
But that's not what the Lord had set up with Adam.
No. And in fact, one of the signs that we'd be living under the great beast system that John tells us is that the beast would redo the calendar. And the beast did. We do start the year in January in praise of Janus, who is actually Zepho, and they honor him in Rome. And the beast started the calendar with him. But the calendar actually begins in the fall.
So that's fascinating. The Lord uses so much harvest metaphors for the latter days. Get your crops in because winter is coming.
That's excellent. And certainly it's ready for the next cycle. Having the Lord come and be king is the next cycle. And the harvest, he's going to come and do the harvest, just like Adam had to do the harvest when he realized he had to move on. The end of the half hour of silence begins what is called the testimony of nature. And the Doctrine and Covenants talks about this, that the Lord says that when my servants are finished with their teaching, I will then send nature to testify on my behalf. So the Old Testament talks about that the preaching would be man to man. And the Lord talks about in there that they won't believe what I say, even though a man comes and tells them of it. And we have our missionaries going door to door. We have our social media campaigns. We have all kinds of humans, you and I, sharing the gospel with others during this period of time, including into the half hour of silence. And then the Lord says enough, and he lets nature begin to do it.
And that's really fascinating because he came and preached himself in the flesh, and he's given us a turn, and still some people don't listen. They didn't listen to him personally. They haven't listened to some of their family and friends. And so now he's going to use something that's, I'm guessing, much harder to ignore.
Well, I think that's correct. So he ties this beginning of the nature speaking and the end of door-to-door missionary work to this idea of the half hour of silence. So we're able to understand by putting them together that the silence is in the heavens.
Okay, because we haven't stopped working down here.
No, and the prophets haven't stopped speaking. And so I have heard people say, well, it's not silent at all. Are you saying that revelation has ceased? No, the signs are in the heavens. And we are living in the days of the Prince of Peace. Modern man doesn't really appreciate what the heavens used to do, how they used to speak loudly. We're in this era where the last great sign, we've had a few, but the last great sign really was the Star of Bethlehem, and that brought in the Prince of Peace. What peace? Well, in part, the peace of the heavens. So we're going to see the heavens get loud again, and they're going to speak, and nature is going to speak, and the relative peace that we've had in nature, yeah, there's an earthquake here and there. There's some tornadoes and some terrible things that happened. But by and large, it's relatively peaceful. That is going to change. So I think that we can then speculate by putting our timeline together that the Lord is going to end the missionary work at some future point before this happens. I personally cannot see him leaving his young missionaries all around the world as nature starts to go insane. I think what's going to happen is he's going to call them home first. Again, it's my opinion. And then when that happens, we're going to see nature is going to begin to speak. Now, we can attach one other part to that. I did have a dear friend who was a mentor of mine, who was one of the presiding bishops in the church in my youth. And he used to tell me things and teach me, and I could ask him any question, and it was really kind of a wonderful mentorship to have. And I remember he told me one time, we were sitting in church together, and he sat next to me, and he said, "The Lord will not allow the money system of America to fail until he's ready to end the missionary work, because all the money flows in one direction, out of the U.S., into the missionary labors, into the temple work labors, into the labor of the church, and he will not allow that to cease until he's done with it."
I can see proof of that just by my years of studying the chaotic nature that is the financial system of the United States. Has there ever been a country, an empire, a kingdom this in debt, and yet relatively unaffected in day-to-day operations?
And you even see the nations trying to say, we need to get rid of the dollar, and they can't seem to be able to. It's really the standard. But he said that the Lord did that, and it's because the work has to emanate from this place and push it forward. So we can therefore speculate. John says that the money system is going to fail. He tells us that. You can find it in Revelation 18 and in a few other spots. Our money system is going to collapse. I believe that it will collapse shortly after the end of the missionary work and about the time that nature begins to speak. In fact, John makes it sound that it is the speaking of nature that overwhelms the infrastructure and that the money system therefore can't manage it anymore.
No, that's interesting. Okay, so Again, moving forward, what's next?
When the money system collapses and when nature starts to cause chaos around the globe, things are not going to go the same way as they're going now. You hear a lot of people say, and I've heard this many times, oh, if the money system collapses, how am I going to pay my mortgage?
Well, it's a valid question, but short-sighted.
Well, I think it just doesn't show really the depth of what's coming.
Well, and we are so accustomed to the way things operate now that you go to flip on a light switch and it turns on the electricity. So subconscious that even though you know the power is out. So that's the same question with her. How will I pay my mortgage if I don't have money? There won't be a bank to pay the mortgage to.
Correct. And how is the banker going to get every single house that he feels that should be paying him? Is he going to send the police? No, and they have problems of their own, such as they need to be watching after their own families. Are they going to send the army? How are we going to pay the soldiers? How are we going to feed them? How are we going to buy gas for their tanks and their ships? When this thing falls apart, it's going to fall hard. Now, Joseph Smith talked about some of these things. He actually said that in terms of America, there was going to be unrest on both coasts.
And we've actually seen of late people trying to intentionally increase this unrest.
I find it really interesting because Joseph said that the chaos on both coasts, both American coasts, would be due to what he called tribalism.
Oh, interesting. Care to elaborate?
I think that the whole term racism that we use today really came into play in the 30s, and particularly with Hitler, who was really into race, and certainly Darwin, who was trying to figure out, this type of stuff. Hitler was a Darwinist. The term racism really came after Joseph Smith's day. And so his use of the word tribalism as being a means of the contention or part of it, I think was deeply profound. We are finding tribalistic problems, racism being the cause of so much contention, and particularly on the coasts.
No, that's interesting. And if you stress that even more by shutting down money system, by, public services go away, that I would think would only amplify people's drive to settle in on their racism. Getting back to that next timeline is we would see money go away, tensions inflame even more. What comes after that?
Well, Joseph said that there would be safety in the mountains. And why I find that interesting is the Lord said even in his day, when you see some of these things, flee to the mountains. And we have this ridge of mountains in the inner mountain west that we call the Everlasting Hills. Prior to Joseph Smith's death, he was looking for a place to move the saints. We had primarily gathered in Illinois because we had lost Zion, as we had talked about before. And he needed a new place to put us. We did not intend on staying in Illinois. We wanted to be in the city of Zion, but we didn't have it. And we were going to now have to go the long way round. We had a very short window as a people to avoid all the things that we're talking about and bring Zion early. But the Lord said, in order to pull this off, we had to be exact and very particular and do everything his way. And that if we couldn't, we'd have to go the long way round. Well, it turns out we couldn't. So we went the long way round. So Joseph was next trying to figure out, where do we move the people for this long way round that we're going to have to go to? And he thought about Texas. There was talk about Mexico. He had even thought about going to Oregon. In the end, he and Brigham, and it's another story we can save for another day, decided on basically what we today call Utah, Idaho, Arizona, this sort of strip that's sort of in the mountains. I think Joseph relied on the Lord saying, when the times of trouble come, flee to the mountains. Joseph called this area the corridor of safety, and it basically ran from up by Canada down through these mountains, down through a little, part of Nevada, part of Colorado, a little Wyoming, some Montana, down into Idaho, Utah, Arizona. That would be the safest place. He even said that there'd be troubles here. And again, we had an earthquake. Now, it's true that the church has expanded around the world. And while Zion in Refuge is in this corridor of safety, the Lord has also set up stakes of Zion around the world as places that people can flee to. Zion is the highest mountain. And so when one can't flee to the corridor of safety mountains, one must flee to the stake of Zion that is nearest to them. In many regards, we see this also as the temple. Stand ye in holy places. Not everyone's going to be able to get to the corridor of safety, but the Lord has set up safe spots all around the world.
And I've always loved that word stake. I know it's been misunderstood or misinterpreted by many people, but if you are accustomed to setting up a tent, a tabernacle, to keep your tent aloft, you have to stake it into the earth. You have to pick a spot and pound something into the earth so that it can't move. So the winds come, the earth shakes, the tent stays up.
I love it. It sets up a temporary canopy. The stake is secure, but the canopy is temporary because the tabernacle is put up before the temple can come. And it's the same with Zion. You make an interesting point. Zion in refuge is like a staked tabernacle, waiting for the great temple that the Lord will come. Incidentally, and this will be kind of fun, do you know what the stake is in Hebrew?
No.
The stake in Hebrew is the vav, and specifically it's the nail that pierces the palm of the Savior. So he is actually our stake that is holding us to the ground, that is giving us the sure foundation. It is the stake of Christ on Calvary.
Wonderful how it all fits together.
It's really cool. This is why we love the Old Testament. When you put the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Restoration together, you get a picture that is really, really a wonderful thing. While the saints are gathering to the stakes of Zion and certainly into the corridor of safety, and here we get into some more speculation, I believe that the testimony of nature will begin, and that testimony of nature is going to separate the old world from the new world.
Okay, right now they're separated by very large bodies of water, and we can cross them fairly easily now. Is that going to be impossible?
Yes. Isaiah says that there'll be no travel by air or water.
Well, that would be astounding. As our technology has advanced quite a bit, we can travel these distances quite easily. But if the money system has shut down, giant expensive jets and very expensive boats that use a lot of fuel to operate, unless you have reserves, you're not going anywhere.
Well, that's true. There is no ship, space shuttle, airplane, or super train that's going to be able to go through a Cat 14 tornado.
We've just invented a new category of tornado and hurricane. No, and that's a good point. If since the Lord's birth, we have not seen what the earth is like when it's testifying of the divinity and also, on a scarier note, the power of the Lord, we're not ready for this. We're not ready to see what a Category 14 hurricane looks like, what a ground that can't stop shaking. Even the animal kingdom is supposed to react differently.
Well, they will. And the part that people don't really put together, and this again has to do with the Prince of Peace. Yes, the earth is going to be in commotion, but so is the moon, so is the sun.
Oh, interesting.
So is Mars, so is Jupiter, so is Saturn, Venus, Mercury, and whoever else the Lord wants to send over.
And we have so mapped them, we know exactly where they should be and what they should be doing.
Well, we think they haven't moved in 9 zillion years and that they were there greeting the Tyrannosaurus Rex while he was eating the Stegosaurus Rex.
And so we're not ready. If they start doing things that are unusual, as we have read from some parts of the Old Testament, they can get closer, a lot closer.
The planets are alive, and although soon they will testify in their majesty, today they sing their praises to the Lord and call out to him in song. Here is the Earth's song, as captured by NASA in 2012. The planets are alive, and they are the Tessabim, as the Lord of Sabaoth controls them. They are the angels that are the hosts of heaven, as opposed to the human angels. There are human angels, but they are the hosts of heaven angels that fly through the midst of heaven and have their wings. That's what the scriptures say. And they're going to also start preaching. And it's going to be very frightening for a lot of people when they see it, if they don't understand what they're looking at. They're going to be very confused.
And that's a better point, because if it is the testimony of nature, it wouldn't impact people unless nature itself was saying, something is different, pay attention to me, I'm clearly obeying someone else.
While the continents are separated, it's going to accomplish two things. First of all, Zion has to be built where Adam originally wanted to put it. which is in the American continent. We know that it is in the land of Missouri. On the other side of the globe, the Lord promised David and Shem and others that Jerusalem would be a site of rulership and a holy spot for the house of Israel. So we have two spots that need to be built up, Jerusalem and Zion. By separating the continents, this is going to allow that to happen. The Jews are going to be able to focus on Jerusalem, and the children of Ephraim who have gathered in the corridor of safety are going to be able to work with the tribe of Manasseh on building up Zion. Now, the advantage to Zion is that she's going to be safe and able to be built because all of the problems that she was worried about with the world are not going to be an issue because the world can't get here. However, Jerusalem and the poor Jews are going to have a much different scenario.
They're quite literally in the center of the old world.
And they are disliked by a lot of the nations. This is going to bring about Gog and Magog.
Okay, so moving forward in our timeline, we have nature has been chaotic or still continuing to be. And now we have the enemies of the Israelites, specifically Judah, seeing an opportunity.
Yes. The world is also going to start to put together and believe that a lot of the international problems that they've been struggling with are centered around some of the machinations of the children of Judah. Now, whether that's fair or not fair is not the debate. The debate is that they are going to believe that by controlling Jerusalem and punishing Jerusalem, they're going to be able to accomplish their end goals. And sadly, Israel is not going to have the support of her best allies. Right now, the children of Ephraim and Manasseh, and basically the United States, have befriended Israel. And they, in connection with the Brits, and unfortunately the Illuminati, which are Esau, have also been protecting the land of Israel. When that protection is lost because of the testimony of nature, those nations that believe that the Jewish people need to be punished and that they want to own the land of Israel because they believe it belonged to their ancestors and they don't recognize Jacob's claim, are going to gather and attack. Ezekiel particularly suggests that this is going to be a coalition primarily of Esau. It's going to include some of the houses of Japheth, and it's going to be led by the Russians as we understand it. And we are watching these very things set up right now as we are seeing leaders in these countries talk about what are we going to do about Jerusalem? How are we going to have peace until Israel is managed? And we certainly are seeing on the rise Russia as being a very powerful force
in the region, specifically as they've reopened bases in the Black Sea so that they can maintain bases in Turkey and supplying weapons to the Syrians. And so it seems as if this is falling in place, whereas maybe even several hundred years ago, people would have read and not understood who is Gog and Magog. But we're starting to see these pieces come together.
One of the things that most people miss, if you put all of the revelations together, it becomes pretty clear that there are actually two wars in Jerusalem before the Lord's return. Most people think that there's one war, and I guess there could be, we're speculating. But when you put all the facts together, it doesn't really work. You see that there really needs to be two wars, because the prophets say that there's this horrible war where all the enemies of Israel come together and that they attack Israel, and that the Lord, with his power, again, testimony of nature, stops them, and in fact wipes them out, to the point that they go back home terribly defeated and deeply wounded, and that the weaponry that is left behind is enough to power the nation of Israel for 7 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that would be the first attack on Israel, a first war, but not Armageddon, as we're often assuming is the one war that people assume is happening. But you're saying there's two. This is the first one.
Yeah, there's going to be two. At least that's the way it reads when you put all the prophecies together. The first war will come, and the Jews will be protected and saved by divine help. And it's going to be so obvious to them that they were divinely saved, that they're going to actually begin to restore their firm belief in Jehovah as their God. It's going to be undeniable that some supernatural force, that some powerful God cares about them. And there's only one that they know that cares about them.
Well, and that's wonderful. And so then it's a mercy to bring them back to him.
Yes, he's going to make that attempt to show he can defend and protect them.
And what are they going to do with this new faith, or rejuvenation of faith?
It gives them so much courage that they're going to rebuild their temple.
Okay, and that's going to be a sticking point for one other major religion that comes to mind.
Well, yes, and actually all of the world wants that temple site, which is interesting. There really isn't any religion that doesn't want Jerusalem for some reason. And so when the Jews take over this land and they rebuild their temple, and they're supposed to, that's going to tick off a lot of people.
And they had just been sent away with their tail between their legs. So with the nations that had combined to attack Israel, seeing them emboldened, seeing them rebuilding their temple, the anger that has been among Esau and brewed there for so long is going to have to come back to a head.
So on this continent, while Jerusalem is isolated and is struggling with rebuilding and the wars, and then, of course, putting in their temple, we're going to be doing similar things here. Ezekiel and others explain that these natural events will be in part due to the realignment of the hosts of heaven. These are the planets. You may remember the Lord said that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. This is the beginning of that process. It is my speculation that the planet Jupiter will play a major role in these events. Now, two of the big ones connected to these signs in the heavens will be the return of the lost 10 tribes and the return of the city of Enoch. This will cleanse the land for the great conference at Adamondiaman, which is located in Missouri. At that valley, the Lord is going to come and gather up all the keys of authority that he has given out over the course of time. Father Adam is going to be there, and he's going to announce that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer of the human family. Father Adam will announce that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer of his family before all of the prophets that have existed from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and in every other place where the Lord has sent prophets on the earth.
Okay, so the Lord is going to appear at this great conference. That sounds very much like that's the second coming. He's back.
Oh, that's an excellent question. No, the Lord has to come and do this because he has to fulfill the promise to Amos that he will do nothing without revealing his secrets to the prophets. So this is not a worldwide announcement of his coming. This is an appearance. He needs to gather up all the keys. While he was here, he gave away powers and keys and authorities to various people. You remember that in the New Testament, he gives the keys to Peter and the apostles and tells them to go out and do the work. Before you can actually open a door or officially turn powers, you need to have all the keys. Now granted, he's God, so don't misunderstand. But he's a God of order. And by gathering up all of the keys and having everything in his possession, getting a report from everyone and sort of having this conference where he gets to tell the prophets and the people that he's coming and that he is ready and this is what to expect, he fulfills the promise of Amos and he proves that he is a God of order and authority. Once he's gathered all of that together and Adam has told the family, this is the Messiah. This is Jesus Christ. This is what Daniel was talking about. You remember the Ancient of Days in Daniel we talked about and that very strange vision that Daniel had? He was seeing this moment.
Wow.
Then, with everything in place and him telling his prophets what he's going to do, he will then ascend into heaven and prepare for his return. Now, with those keys in place, Zion City is going to get built. And the part that's going to be hard on a lot of people is the city of Enoch, which is on an orb. It's an actual city. The Old Testament talks about the city and the land and everything being taken up. It's an actual physical place. Is going to come back and be pushed into the earth.
It has to rejoin from where it was taken then.
Yes. And when that happens, we are told it's going to clean the Mississippi Valley and basically the Louisiana Purchase area of the United States, because that is the center of Zion, where God is going to put his capital city. And it needs to be cleaned, baptized, purified, and prepared so that it can be a clean place. Now, this is why chaos on the coasts, like we said in America, the corridor of safety in the mountains, when this terrible water comes and cleans out that whole area, the safest place to be will be above the waterline in the mountains.
So this wasn't a second coming. This was a preparation, another preparation for the second coming. City of Enoch will return, but that still is not the return of the Lord. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that is correct. He's going to then, after he gets all the keys back and make his preparations, he is then going to ascend and go back to a preparation place. and get ready for his return. Now, what's coming next? We're building Zion. Jerusalem is getting fixed up. The temple is going up. This is when I believe the Battle of Armageddon takes place.
Okay, the second war that we often confuse as one.
Yes, a little time has passed, and the losers have been licking their wounds. And just as we saw in the stories of Joseph, if you've been reading volume 9 or 10 of the series, how Esau would go away, come back and fight, go away, come back and fight. They have this pattern because they're very prideful. They go and lick their wounds, and after a little while they say, if we only had bigger stuff, and we only had more help, and we're going to go back and get them again. I think it's going to be the second time. They're going to come and do a fight. And this time, because of the pride of the Jews, and for other reasons, this time they're actually going to be defeated. Now, that's not us saying this. Ezekiel says that 5/6 of the Jewish people will be killed.
Oh, wow. So while they enjoyed such a victory in the first battle, this one they're not going to see the same results. They're not going to see the same protection from heaven.
No, and I don't know why. I can speculate. This is a very hard thing to say, but it's not coming from us. It's coming from Ezekiel. When you realize that it is the prophet Ezekiel that the Jewish nation uses as their claim to the land of Israel, he's the one that says 5/6 of them are going to be killed in this battle of Armageddon. It's not us, and we weep for them. But it's their prophets that are saying that. Now, this last particular battle, we are told the remaining Jews will gather to the temple, and the Lord will appear and come and save them. And that is the official second coming that will be seen and heard by the world. I personally believe that this will happen on their Jubilee year, and that it's going to occur in the fall of the year 2030. We've talked about that before. Once the Lord has returned, he is going to invite the world to come to witness his coronation. And at that time, too, we're told that there'll be resurrections, and that many will come to Jerusalem, and many will say, let us take the hem of the Jew and go to Jerusalem and meet the Messiah because we hear he is with you. The Lord will bind Lucifer, and we will have 1,000 years of peace with Jesus Christ as King.
That's wonderful. And something that I know has been deeply yearned for by so many prophets. You read their words, those that have been able to witness this, that have been given that privilege, have wished desperately that it would happen in their time.
You know, it's so interesting because as time progresses, prophecy is always 20/20 in the hindsight. As you look forward, you realize that there's a lot that we think we understand and we don't quite understand. But when you look back through the time, you discover that the Lord not only told you the exact truth, but that it was always there all the time. Let me just give you 2 thoughts. The Lord says that when he comes, he's going to come with healing in his wings.
It's a beautiful metaphor, but
Well, it's very interesting to me because reading that many years ago, I always thought, yes, there's been a lot of sorrow on the earth. We've had a lot of disappointment. How wonderful to have a God come with healing in his wings. He also said that in the last days, men's hearts would fail them
for grief.
For fear.
Wow.
What is this fear that will cause men's hearts to fail? Disappointment? Medical betrayal? And what is the healing that the Lord is bringing in his wings? I have the feeling that as we pass through some of these things, we're going to discover that the Lord spoke the exact truth to us, but we weren't able to fully grasp it until we looked back through the ages and discovered he is the God of truth.
This summation of what's coming has been beneficial, has helped. This is our understanding. We touch on this quite a bit. I know, Reed, you've touched on all of this timeline that's in front of us in a book you wrote, End Times and Latter Days. It's
Yes.
a supplement to your Gospel Feast series, I understand.
I actually wrote it when I saw the trumpet fall out of Moroni's mouth, and I sat down and thought, oh my gosh, I want to put together something. It's a very short little book. I tried to just take all of the data that's been gathered, all the things that have been said that are in the greater Gospel Feast series, and just sort of put them into a short, concise way to help people navigate what I think is coming.
Well, Reed, this has been wonderful. Anyone, if you need to review any of this timeline, you can find it in the book End Times and Latter Days. It's on Amazon. It's included with Kindle Unlimited, and you can find these books as well on gospelfeastbooks.com. Reed, this has been wonderful. Our 49th episode, a very special Eastern Thinking episode, a question and answer. But in Eastern Thinking tradition, our next episode is our 50th. And that should be special. It's a Jubilee episode. And then after that, we will begin our next feast on the book of Zechariah.
A book nobody reads.
A book you have covered, but you don't really understand. And until our next feast, may the Spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you. We've had a slight delay in our planned production schedule, but never fear, we have more for this season. This would be a good time to hit the subscribe button on your podcast server so you won't miss a feast.